Hi, this is the Social Gelo with Angelo show. My name's Angelo. I'm a social scientist, surfer, martial artist, and a whole lot of other things. Coming to you live from Kasai City, Japan, the Social Gelo with Angelo show. Hey, how's it going? Thank you for checking out Social Gelo with Angelo. This is part of a special series I'm doing on Kajukenbo and the history of Kajukenbo. If you don't know what Kajukenbo is, go ahead and search for it. I'll put a link here on the Wikipedia page. It's a mixed martial art, and I've been interviewing different instructors from different, I don't want to say styles, we're all the same style, but from different schools, I should say, that share their experiences. And I really hope you enjoy this series. Today I had a great talk with Mr. Ron Estellar, Grandmaster Ron Estellar, and he had some great things to share about history and MMA, and it was a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. So I'm here with Ron Estellar. Did I pronounce your name correctly, Ron?
Yes.
All right.
Certainly did.
All right, awesome. I have a tendency of butchering names, and I apologize ahead of time for that. Ron is a martial arts instructor. As some of my listeners may know, I've been doing a series for specifically Kajukenbo, which is the martial art that I practice. And if you don't mind telling my listeners what, I guess I'll let my listeners know. So Kajukenbo has different ranks, and depending on how long you've been doing it, you might have a different title. What title do you have in Kajukenbo?
The title I have and the title I use are two different ones. I officially am a Grandmaster, got my Grandmastership in 2016, but I am a teacher. I have always been a teacher. I love to teach. My students still call me Sifu because I am their Sifu. And that's why I use that title. It means the most to me.
That's awesome. And to some of my listeners that don't know where Sifu comes from, would you mind kind of breaking that down a little bit?
Sure. It's really funny because Kajukenbo is such a mishmash of arts that we mix the Japanese and the Chinese. So some Kajukenbo schools use sensei, some use Sifu. Our lineage was the Chuanfa, so we leaned more toward the Chinese end. So that's why we ended up using Sifu. When I first started, Charles Gaylord was just known as Chief. And the chief instructor, or the head instructor at the school, was just known as Chief. And then right around that 68 time frame, things started changing a little bit.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. Yeah, the lineage I come from, the Abad method, they also use Sifu in a lot of the Chinese titles as well. Of course, being out here in Japan, everyone just calls me sensei, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, of course. It just means teacher, just like Sifu. It just means teacher. It's nothing magical or mystical about it,
Yeah. So I guess just to kind of open things up, what made you get into martial arts? When did you, what inspired you to get started?
Well, I started in 1967 in the Taekwondo program at the local community college. I had just moved to the San Leandro area like maybe 4 months before or so, and didn't really have any friends yet. And like within the first couple of weeks or a month of school, when we just starting 8th grade, I met a friend, and he was going to the Chabot College program. I had a paper route, and I had just got jacked for my money and my bike doing my paper route. And so my mom thought it was a good idea when I suggested to her that I go take karate, and she liked the idea. I had been interested in martial arts a little bit. It's funny because my first exposure to the martial arts was James West from the Wild Wild West series. And I just loved the way he kicked and chopped and threw people around, and I wanted to do that too.
Oh man, I loved watching that show. It's
Well,
been a
did you
long
realize that
time,
you were
yeah.
watching Kajukenbo?
I
Did you
had
realize?
I had no idea I was watching Kajukenbo. I just remembered watching it like it was one of the shows that as a kid, me and my dad, my dad didn't watch too much TV, but when he would sit down and watch TV, that was one of his favorite shows. So
Yeah. Well,
that's really
he
cool.
trained. Robert Conrad trained with Leone and got to do his own stunt work. So a lot of the fight scenes that you saw on that show were Kajukenbo. And if you go back and look at it, you can see, there's a scene where, he takes off his hat, turns around, throws it in the face, and kicks him in the groin. I'm going, man, there's Kajukenbo right there.
Oh, I'm gonna have to rewatch it with like a fight analysis perspective. That's so cool.
And I did that. I bought the box set, and that's exactly what I did. I go, oh man, there's Grab Art 15. I'm looking at it like that now. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Still good
awesome.
stuff.
So you were in college. You decided to pick up karate, and you said you started actually in a taekwondo school. Is that did I hear you correctly?
Well, it was a program at Chabot College. I was just entering eighth grade, so was I maybe 13?
Oh, okay.
I think I was 13 when I started.
Oh,
That was 1967. Yeah,
all right, all right.
and then I was only there for maybe 6 to 8 months, and then my friend quit. He was my ride. I didn't have a ride there. I didn't want to take the bus. So I started searching. There was only one other karate school in San Leandro at the time, and that was that was the Gaylord School, and it actually was run by somebody else at the time. And then that's where I ended up.
All right. And then you ended up, you said because it was the only other school. What were some of the differences, though, that you might have noticed? Like going from the few months of Taekwondo that you did and then going to the Kajukenbo school. What were some of the
The contact,
contrasts? The
the
contact.
contact, the contact was what was the difference. Um, there was no children at that school. Uh, and there were some monsters at that school. That's all the Palin brothers were there at the time. Jim Juarez, who ended up being my teacher, was one of the main instructors there. And most of and Juarez was an angry young man. He was only 16 at the time, but he's ran most of the classes that I was in. Came in, just kicked everybody's butt and went home. I mean, that was Juarez. That's the way it was. There was no. I was the youngest kid in the class. There was no other children too much, and I got my butt handed to me nightly.
Oh, wow. And at this point, I mean, if I'm following this timeline correctly, you were still about maybe 13, 14, right?
Yeah, probably right around 14 by the time I got to Kajukenbo. Yeah.
And then
Uh,
Juarez was about 16, 17, around there?
he was 16, yeah, 16, 17 at the time.
Oh,
Yes,
wow.
but he was teaching a lot of the classes at that time already. So I think Juarez started probably in 63 or 64, somewhere through there.
So you get there, you start noticing there's more contact. There's always this point when people are trying a new martial art or when they're trying something new where it kind of clicks and they decide that this is for them. Particularly martial arts, kind of traditional martial arts, kind of different from boxing and also the kickboxing tracks or more sport fighting because of the rank system. You start seeing that there's going to be a longer road to just going from I'm going to try to defend myself to I'm going to try to get this mastery of techniques, or I want to go the long haul and go for the black belt. What exactly happened that made you kind of see that, and when did you make that decision that you were going to be there and that you were going to go for your black belt?
I can't really say I had black belt on my mind. I was just enjoying being there. And honestly, I really had nowhere else to go, nowhere else to be. Uh, Only child of a single mom, and my mom worked 4 to midnight. So there was no place for me, the streets. Um, so I just went and just enjoyed being there, and it was all good. It was all good.
That's really cool. So you had nowhere to go, and that's what kind of kept you sticking around. You didn't really have the black belt. You weren't really there to try to get your black belt as much as you enjoyed doing it. At what point did you realize that you were going to end up, in this position where you're going to be an instructor and you were teaching others? And how did you kind of process transitioning from student to instructor?
Because I was there every day, I learned quite a bit fast. Curriculum, and it just came naturally to me, I guess. I don't know. I enjoyed being there, and I enjoyed doing it, and eventually was starting to help in the class. So by 71, here I am, maybe 3 years in, and going there every day. It was time. And the blessing for me was in 1971, with the okay of my instructor at the time and a school sponsor, I was able to start teaching a after-school program at my high school. So every Thursday there was a thing called concilium period, where we would get out of school like at 2 o'clock, and from 2 to 3:15 there was different activities. Kids could go home, or they could stay and do different activities on campus. And martial arts was one of the things that they could do. So I actually started teaching my first class of my own group in 1971.
Oh, that's really cool. That's really cool. And at that point, you were already a black belt by that point, or?
No. Actually, I was a blue belt.
Oh, you were a blue belt.
I was a blue belt. So, and then there was like a brown belt from some other system that was there that was helping me as well. But it was my program. He tried to take it over because he was a brown belt, but I started it, and I've always had that strong personality. I said, "Oh no, I don't think so, dude." And yeah, but we found our ground, and we were teaching two different things, but how many ways can you throw a punch or a kick? So it still worked out, and I did that 71 and 72, and I graduated in 1972. So that program lasted for me 2 years.
Oh wow, that's really cool. So as time went by, what exactly was going on with Kajukenbo at that time, like historically speaking?
Well, for us, it was tough because Gaylord was the first of the group to really, I'm not going to say break off, but possibly branch off and start calling himself professor as well. I was just a kid at the time, so I didn't really know the politics of it. All I knew is it changed from chief to professor. So he was the professor. He came in. He had already moved to school to Fremont and had left his school to Vargas at the time. And so that was that was probably one of the main things, is we were the outcast of Kajukenbo because he dared to call himself professor, and Sijo was very adamant and angry about that, and said so in several articles. But look at Kajukenbo now; you can't throw a nickel in a crowd and not hit 15 professors. Actually, I've changed that to 15 grandmasters now. But,
Yeah,
it's the explosion of what it is, and that's why the BOA has gotten back together and is trying to oversee the promotions of high ranks with a more with a more an eye on making sure that everybody meets requirements. I am honored to be part of Sijo's BOA. They asked me about 2 years ago because they are getting representatives from the different branches. All branches are recognized and thought of now. So I am on Sijo's BOA representing the Gaylord branch.
that's really cool. Well, just to kind of update some of my listeners that this might be the first podcast or YouTube video you're watching on this, Sijo is the founder of Kajukenbo, Seijo Imperado, and that's what Ron is kind of talking about as far as the history is concerned. Um, so kind of going back to your story, you when did you when and how, I guess, did you end up getting your black belt? How did that go for you?
Well, I trained steady from 68, well, 68 in Kajukenbo till about 73. And in 73, I took a little break. You know, there was, you turn 18, 19, wine, women, and song were calling. I was riding motorcycles. There was better things to do than get my butt kicked every day. So I took a little break. Um, and then in 75, I refound my friend and my personal mentor, Jim Moraz. He had broken off and started his own school as well. And so I started training again in 75, but really just not that long, maybe a few months to a year. It was rough because I call it my disco break. So I was professionally dancing from like 75 to 81. Um, but I found Juarez back again in 1979. So from 75 to 79 was kind of out, but was never stopped training because I had lots of friends that were training, so we'd always get together and spar. I always worked on my stuff. I always still loved the martial arts. I was bouncing at different bars as well. As long as I was in the bars, I might as well get paid. So I'd get paid to dance, I'd get paid to bounce, and the bouncing kept my ability sharp and in fact enhanced my martial arts because I was hands on, making it apply. I have several drills that I do right now that came from those bouncing days. I can explain those if you ask later. And so to me, that was all still training. And then when I found Juarez again in 1979, I've been with him and steady. Not a single day has gone by without martial arts since.
Wow. And so you got your you were bouncing, right? And I guess I mean we can go into it. Not, I guess I'm going to put here a note to mention the drills that you got from bouncing. But one of the questions I kind of want to throw out there is a lot of times some people will talk about the difference between self-defense and MMA, and they'll say things like, you know, how things work on the street as opposed to how things work in a cage fight, right? How would you kind of explain as far as Kajukenbo, MMA, and then bouncing? How would you kind of explain the differences between these three concepts? Do you see these three concepts as separate things, or do you see them as one and the same?
Absolutely separate, and that's actually in all my marketing material. I build my school as traditional slash sport slash street, because I work on all three separately, and yet they can be blended together. Meaning, we do traditional kung fu sets that are 400 years old from Hoxilum. That's a Wong Jack Man system. We got those through Al DeCoscos. Okay, so there's our tradition, our traditional Kajukenbo sets and grab and punch tricks. Now, those are the kung fu forms don't and traditional martial arts don't always apply to street. They can, but not always. Sport combat, there's rules with a referee. There's no referee on the street. There's no rules on the street. So each one has to be different. I love our jiu-jitsu. We do Brazilian jiu-jitsu as well, but I don't want to be rolling around in a parking lot with all the gravel and broken bottles. So do we really want to roll around on the ground? No, but you better know what to do if you're down there. So that's the way we look at that. The bouncing, and I also did loss prevention at several big chain stores as well. So a lot of my kaju, traditional kaju absolutely worked. A lot of our punch tricks, a lot of our grab tricks, and especially our jujitsu, our Danzanru jujitsu, worked very, very well for controlling suspects and controlling and walking people out of the bar. Pain compliance works for a reason because it's painful and people will comply. Hence, pain compliance. You know.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting how many Kajukenbo practitioners I've talked to that actually did some bouncing on the side. And I've talked to a few of them, a lot of my friends, and even myself included. I ended up doing some bouncing for a while, and yeah, definitely the style of jiu-jitsu where you take control from the top and you throw in a lock or some pain resistance to be able to control your opponent to get them to where you want to be is very effective. Um,
Yeah.
Going back to the Kajukenbo and its philosophy, I guess. How is Kajukenbo, and we're kind of talking about it right now, as far as you said when you were bouncing, you were using Kajukenbo. But how has Kajukenbo and its philosophy helped you outside of the dojo in life, in I guess in the way you see things and the way you kind of progressed from this person, a kid who was doing martial arts, teaching some martial arts. Then you started getting older. You started doing some bouncing. How did Kajukenbo kind of shape you as an individual?
It gave me the determination and the knowledge to know that I could do whatever I wanted to do, to be able to dig down deep and not, I'm going to say suffer through things, but yeah, maybe suffer through things. Let me give you an example. When I was going for my black belt, when I was testing for it, I actually didn't black out until 1982. So it took me 15 years from start to finish because of little breaks and stuff to actually black out. My instructor was Juarez's first tested black belt. He had two other black belts before me, but they didn't test. I was his first tested black belt. Um, but I was carrying 16 units of school, working midnight till 8 in the morning, going to school from 9 to 2. Again, carrying 16 units of pre-med stuff, and to be able to get through the day, I relied on my Kajukenbo. Relied on my Kajukenbo to dig down deep to get through it. When I was frustrated, I was using my Kajukenbo to calm myself to get through it. When I just could not keep my eyes open another second, I used my Kajukenbo to get through it. And I couldn't have done it without the grit that Kajukenbo embodies us in.
And just to give some of my listeners a little more perspective here, what was I know, and every Kajukenbo school has a different type of test. They're all really rough, but would you mind sharing some of the things you had to go through for your belt?
It's funny because I just ran across my VHS tape of it, and was watching it with my son-in-law, who is former UFC bantamweight Michael Mayday McDonald. Here's a professional UFC fighter rated in the top 5, when he was fighting, and he was watching it, and he's known me for a while now, and he was amazed at the power and focus. He goes, "Man, you were kicking everything. Everything was hard on every single strike, and we did everything. Every strike we do, every kick we do, every block we do, every grab art and punching attack and pinion that we do. And with my instructor, he makes us do everything right and left side. So even all our pin-ons were right and left side. So it's like knowing, 30 pin-ons rather than 15, because learning a pin-on the left side is it's a brand new pin-on. It's that brain doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Um, but, but that's why he made us do it, so it would work that way. So we went through everything striking the bags. Nothing was in the air. I think I started at 9 in the morning. A 1 hour, um, a 1 hour oral test on history. It covered a lot of different subjects, and all of it was in kneel position. So think about being kneeling down for an hour and then having to get up. I couldn't feel my legs at all. They were wobbly. Then I had to start my test.
Oh,
So I
jeez.
started my test unable to even stand. And I think we ended about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then that was after fighting 2 rounds of fighting one, a round of fighting two, and then a round of fighting three. And at the time, there was Juarez had an army, and I was getting my butt handed to me. But it's not about winning at that time. It's about continuing. It's about surviving. It's about that will to survive, and that's all he was looking for at that point. I fought back. I look at it. It's kind of like I don't know if you ever seen that poster of a frog choking the crane from the
Yeah,
inside.
from the inside, you had to make sure it doesn't get swallowed.
Yeah, that was kind of me there. I was getting swallowed up, and I was choking. I was choking somebody. Um, on the three that were fighting me, one of them ended up becoming a third in the world Muay Thai champion. He was rated third in the world. Fought in France, Belgium. That was Jeff Orzo. The other one, Frank Miller, was literally a killer. He was a Army Ranger sniper that unfortunately the things he did for this country really messed with his head. But he found peace within Kajukenbo and his brothers with us. But here's two killers, and they were trying to kill me. You know, it's funny because Jeff, the round before is, here's my best friend, right? And, I just got done fighting too, and he's putting ice on me, and he's taking care of me. He's putting ice on me, and he's rubbing my back, and putting ice on me, and gets it back out there. But then when the three, he's the one that's stomping me on the head on the ground. He was my best friend. But that was Juarez school at the time, so.
Yeah, that's Kajukenbo.
That's
That's
Kajukenbo right
exactly what
there, exactly.
Kajukenbo is right there. I've showed footage to my friends, and they're just like, "You have this weird bullying system going on." I'm like, "It's not bullying.
It's not boring.
It's
It's learning how to survive
exactly
when you can't survive.
exactly." Oh man, yeah. So my listeners, if you didn't catch on when he was saying the two, we were talking about 2-on-1, 3-on-1s. Kajukenbo does sparring not with just one-on-one fights, but you have to learn how to defend yourself against multiple opponents, or in some cases survive, like we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
So kind of looking, you've been doing Kajukenbo for a long time. What are some of the differences you've noticed? Do you feel, I always explain to people that Kajukenbo is constantly evolving. From your observation, how has Kajukenbo evolved from when you started way back then, when you were a teen, into now? What were some of the major changes you've noticed?
Um, well, for a while, it turned into a tournament art where, we were so good at fighting that we were, winning all the tournaments. And I'm not saying we as in our school, I'm saying Kajukenbo as a whole was feared on the tournament circuit and doing very well with people like Satch Williams and Percy Titsworth and Woody Sims. They were all just California people, but all of them were on the U.S. karate team. All of them fought all over the world. All of them fought on teams that beat some of the major teams. But it really started turning into where they were only going to tournaments, and it lost its street effectiveness. I'm going to say that, not say lost, but got put aside a little bit. For me personally, once I got married, I stopped going to tournaments, and especially once I had my family, I had better things to do on Saturdays. So I really went back to what Kajukenbo was and have stayed with that since. We rarely go to tournaments. I'll pick and choose, and yet when we go, we do very, very well. And I tell the kids it's because your everyday hard work is what got you there. We're not seasoned by any stretch of the imagination, but their strength shows through every time we go.
That's
So
awesome.
for me, that's probably the biggest thing. And the explosion of rank is the biggest thing for me. I just saw too much of a rank explosion and too many high ranks. Some deservingly, some not so much. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So, kind of what is your opinion on because and this is something that like I started doing Kajukenbo from a later generation, but even when I was younger, I remember seeing my first UFC one it was on a friend of mine who did karate. He was a black belt in a style of Okinawan karate, and he would train with some of the jiu-jitsu guys. And back then, jiu-jitsu wasn't what it is now. Jiu-jitsu, no one knew what it was. The jiu-jitsu guys were sharing a studio with a Jeet Kune Do studio, and everyone just saw him rolling around on the ground. And one of those jiu-jitsu guys, when UFC 1 came out, he brought VHS copies of the first UFC, and he handed them to my friend. We were watching it, and I remember sitting there watching it with my friend. I'm like, it looks so savage. It was like, wow, what is going on here? Like it looked like I was trying to figure out whether it was legal because it almost looked like an illegal fight from my perspective. Like it got two guys in a cage, right?
I'm looking at that, and to me, it was like, oh, that looks like Tuesday night.
Yeah,
that looks like Tuesday night's class.
and when I saw it, like I was still. I saw that video before I started doing Kajukenbo. I was just learning how to defend myself on my own. And I didn't start Kajukenbo till I was about 18. So at that time, I was probably about 16 or 15. And I was just trying to learn, just reading books on whatever style I can read about. And when I first saw that, it scared me. And like I was like, holy shit. So like,
well,
but
it certainly dispelled a lot of myths. I look at the UFC as the best and worst thing that's ever happened to the martial arts. The best thing because it did dispel a lot of the myths, those secret, deadly techniques. Well, sometimes not so much, and yet the attitude that it brought, everybody's an MMA fighter now, and but you know what? Again, unless you revel in it, because traditional martial arts, I'm not going to say is dead, but it certainly is hard to get people to train traditional martial arts now. Everybody wants to come in and do, MMA. Well, we are MMA. We can bill ourselves as MMA, and that's what we do. That's why John Hackelman has so many good fighters. That's why our my dojo brother Tom Theophanopoulos has had several ranked fighters, including Mikey McDonald, who made it, got the fight for a championship, and has had quite a few other ones that are just about ready to move up to the next level. So, it's an easy transition for us because we transition all the time. Kajukenbo, and we try and take that seriously. I did. That's why I have my rank in Taekwondo. That's why I have rank in Jiu-Jitsu. I have my Kaju rank, and then because of Juarez, we do a lot of Chinese, Kung Fu as well. So I really have studied each component of Kajukenbo separately, as well as in conjunction with each other.
Did you get a chance to see? There was this Bruce Lee documentary that came out a while back, and I believe it was called I Am Bruce Lee. And they had some Kajukenbo guys on there that were saying that Kajukenbo is the original MMA, right?
Absolutely.
And they were arguing that Bruce Lee, for the people that argue that Bruce Lee was the one who was the original MMA, because some people got upset. Like I saw a bunch of online forums, people were blowing up. Even his daughter was like, "No one knows what Kajukenbo is. My dad's the one who made MMA famous." But if you really look at Bruce Lee's writings, like I've read his books, like Bruce Lee never really created a style. He created more of a philosophy, and even
Yes.
he said in the future, I don't want to see people saying that they know the original Bruce Lee method, or that they teach the Jeet Kune. He didn't view Jeet Kune Do as a style. It was the way of the intercepting fist. So he did not want to create a style because that was very anti his philosophy. But so the argument the Kajukenbo guys were making was, hey, we created this style, this method, and it was a style. It is a style, and it continued to evolve and grow, and that's why they felt it was the original MMA. A lot of people still, got really upset about it. But what's your take on all that?
Well, this is funny because once again, because I started when I started, I seen a lot of this happen. Um, Jeet Kune Do came about after, and I say after, and I may come back to bite me, but I don't think so. After his meetings, his training, his friendships with Tony Ramos, Gaylord, Joe Habuna, Alejo Reyes. He was in the Bay Area. His school was in the Bay Area. He knew and trained with all those guys. So he was exposed to Kajukenbo and Kajukembo's philosophy of doing different things and having different ranges. So did he come up with it all on his own? Or was he influenced, at the very least, influenced by what he saw within Kajukenbo? I kind of think so. Now, his business partner in Oakland, Jimmy Lee, used to come to our dojo all the time and bring his guys and spar because we fought like they did. We weren't tournament. We'd get up there and their Jeet Kune Do, use everything, fight. Well, we did the same damn thing and had been doing the same thing for, what, that was 67, 40, 50, 25 years already. So I personally, just my own opinion, feel that Bruce was influenced at the very least by Kajukenbo in creating Jeet Kune Do.
And I mean, he doesn't exactly hide it either. I mean, the last movie he was working on before he passed away, what was it that it had the Padoga?
Game of Death.
Yeah, Game of Death, right? And one of there was actually a Kajukenbo guy in one of the stages there, and it was on one of the upper stages. Like his philosophy was that, like, here's your basic traditional, and then there was karate, and then as it gets to the upper stages, you start kind of going more into a mixed martial art. So like, he wasn't. I feel he wasn't exactly hiding the idea that he was like he was showing the influences that he had for his philosophies. It's really too bad he passed away before that movie came out.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So like, just kind of going back to the point I said earlier about you saw that first UFC one, you say, hey, this is pretty much Kajukenbo. How did you feel? Because earlier you said you feel that MMA was the best thing to happen to martial arts, and at the same time it was kind of the worst thing to happen to martial arts. What would you mind kind of deconstructing that for a bit, like explaining what you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, the best thing, because it dispelled all the myths of martial arts, like the death. All the deadly techniques. Oh, well, we don't spar because we're too dangerous. Well, UFC proved that people could take a lot more than other people thought they could take. And yet, the worst thing, because now everybody's an MMA fighter, everybody's out there, trying to be a badass, I guess, or chest pumping and I don't know. There's a couple of straight up MMA schools around here in my area, and it just seems like every single person that comes out of that system, it just has very much attitude, and yeah, they're pretty good. I'm gonna say, yeah, they're good training. Looks like good training, but I picked up a couple of their people here and there as well, and the reason that they left was because they were getting beat up every day, um, and and the attitude that they felt like, you know, um, they liked the fact that they were coming into a family rather than getting beat up every day, you know, and actually learning martial arts rather than just training. There is a difference between training and learning martial arts.
Yeah, and that comes a lot with right a lot of the Kajukenbo coming from Hawaii. That whole spirit of Ohana, right? That's something
Exactly, exactly,
that
exactly.
that I completely agree as far as how a strictly MMA dojo works. It's kind of survival of the fittest in those places.
And that's why I try and run mine exactly the way that I was taught. You know, Gaylord treated all of us as if we were his sons. We were his Hanai sons. Hanai son is like an adopted son in Hawaii. So we were all his sons, you know. And one thing about Gaylord was he barely, I mean, for $20 a month, I mean, 30 years, we got together. That's why we're the KAA and Gaylord Method, why we're so close. We don't have too, you know, there's not too much beefs within each other. And when we are, we always work it out because we all train with each other every month. No matter what school we were, we got together once a month with Gaylord for 30 years and trained. So, you know, we are brothers, you know, and help each other, support each other, and watch each other's back all the time, you know. And I truly believe that was because of Gaylord's philosophy of keeping it a family. And that's ran down to my instructor, Jim Juarez, and his wife, Dolores, who is my biggest influence on how I run my dojo, because that woman was an incredible woman. Highest rank in KAA. Matter of fact, I'm having an event this Saturday commemorating her 20 years of, she's been gone for 20 years. She passed 20 years ago. And so I'm going to honor her this weekend by a nice little 8-hour workout. And but yeah, she taught me how to run a school, and I don't mean business wise, because I'm a horrible businessman. I don't have a clue how I've survived 35 years in business. I really don't. But by all counts, I should not have. But
I don't want to give you a spoiler, but I interviewed John about a week ago, and he said the same thing. And I told him, you know that Ron's gonna hear you say this, right? He's like, no, he'd completely agree with
oh
me.
God, horrible. Yeah, you know.
Oh.
But you know,
But it's for the right reasons. Like he was explaining, it's all for the right reasons.
yeah, you know, I depend on those that pay tuition monthly and regularly. But you know, every once in a while, you got to find those ones that, you know, that can't pay and want to be there. They end up being some of your best students, and they wouldn't be if you don't give them a chance. I barely ever paid for lessons myself. You know, my mom lost her job and she wasn't going to be able to pay. And my instructor said, you know what? Don't worry about it. Feed the animals, which was feeding, you know, mice to the snake. What 14-year-old kid doesn't love to do that, right? So, you know, sweep the dojo, you know, and that's how I paid for my lessons, you know, and so I do the same thing, you know, but I live, and my dojo now is in a very affluent community. So I don't have that as much, but I still do have that. And I still have some students that I have to scholarship. But I have a program called Safe Kids that I teach in the schools. And everything I make from that program goes to my scholarship fund. So that way I can teach for free. And yet I draw from the scholarship fund, so I still get paid.
That's awesome.
So that's a win-win for me, you know, and
Yeah.
that's one of the ways how I can stay in business and doing fairly well. Yeah.
Well, that kind of, I guess that kind of covers a little bit of what you're doing right now. I guess before I kind of wrap things up, what are your plans for the future? Like what would you like to do for your school, and what are some things that you would like to see, I guess, in martial arts in general, not just Kajukenbo, but kind of bringing in the entire martial arts community? What are some things that you would like to see happen as time passes?
Well, at 65, I'm going to be 65 here in just a couple of months. I still am a one-man show. I still teach pretty much every class every day. Um, I do have an assistant that I'm looking at turning my school over to now. So I'm little by little letting him have more time. He needs more time in Kaju. He's a loan. He's on loan to me from my friend. Um, he's actually a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt who's running my BJJ program. But he's been with me about 6 months now. I got him up to purple belt material in Kaju. He's turning into a wonderful instructor. His instructor sent him to me so I can teach him how to teach and make a better teacher out of him so he can use him more. So, but I plan on turning my school over to him, and he'll have a satellite school for his instructor as well as teach Kaju. So he's going to have more tools in his box now that he could teach both systems. And I know that I can turn the school over to him and think about retirement here in about 4 or 5 more years. I don't know if I have much more left of me at 70. My body's starting to fail me a little bit. I love teaching and I'll never stop, but I do need to slow down a little bit. I would love to see martial arts get into the school system regularly. That's the martial artist's holy grail, to get into the school system. It's almost impossible to do. But I do have the secret, and that is my Safe Kids program, because I don't bill it as martial arts. I don't bill it as self-defense. I call it anti-abduction strategies and techniques. And that semantics has got me into the school system. And once you're in, then one school will tell another school that tells another school. At one time, I had 7 schools I was teaching at, which just about killed me because that program takes a lot out of me. But I've cut it down to just my 2 community schools now, right by my school, and I can do two programs a year. I can get through that. But there's so many people that I wish could learn that program and teach that program, because in the 17 years that I've been teaching it, it has thwarted 6 kidnapping attempts. Not from my own students, but from kids that took the 3-week program with me. It works. It's simple. And proof is in the pudding. It absolutely works.
So that kind of brings you back to what I said I'd mentioned earlier. You were talking about how you compartmentalize Kajukenbo, or your method, between sport fighting, things like kickboxing, Muay Thai, MMA, self-defense, and then the traditional forms and the Kung Fu. And you said that you actually came up with some drills from bouncing. Would you mind kind of explaining some of that?
Sure, not at all. And so I'll have the guys spar, and as they're fighting, I'll throw out a knife, or I'll throw out a club, or I'll throw out both. Whoever has the fastest reflexes gets to the weapon first. Now you have an empty hand against weapon fight, or you have a weapon against weapon fight. Now, that happened absolutely in the parking lot where the guys were fighting, and one of his buddies threw out a knife, and guy got to the knife. Well, I wasn't going to break that up. You guys go ahead and I'll clean up the mess after. So that's where that drill came from. One of my other ones is multiple opponent fighting, where I use an ancient battle plan, the Battle of Thermopylae. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that. Would you mind, like, a
Sure.
Cliff Notes version?
Yeah, that's not a problem. The Battle of Thermopylae, think of the movie The 300.
Oh, okay.
So that's the story of the 300 Spartans and in the battle down in the valley of Thermopylae.
Oh, okay.
So how I use that, and I have used this technique, is how do you deal with multiple opponents? If you're out in the open, your multiple opponents are just going to surround you and smash you. So if you get inside of a doorway, well, then they can only come through that doorway one at a time. If you knock one out thumb deep, into the eye of number 2, well, number 3 is going to think twice about walking through that door. Same thing between 2 parked cars. Now, you still have to watch your 6, but they can only come through that small space one at a time. And again, you take care of the first two or three, and four is not going to come through. And I have used that technique at in multiple fighting at the bar before. It absolutely works.
So again, just to clarify with my listeners, you've come up with these drills from real life experience. I know some people like to go online nowadays and criticize YouTube videos and be like, but what would you do on the streets? And a lot of these people are saying that, and they've lived like in the middle of nowhere, and they're not even close to an urban area where they have to deal with that kind of stuff. But you've come up with these drills and these these programs from actually being in street fighting situations, in situations where you had to control street fights, and that's where you came up with these drills and these for lack of a better word, these methods, right?
Yeah, exactly. I have another one where I have you both on your knees with hands on the shoulders. I'll put a knife on one end of the mat, a knife on the other end of the mat. Now you have to grapple and control the grapple to be able to get to your weapon. And that's one of my other favorite drills. And again, I saw two guys rolling around. The guy threw it, and that was part of that same one. They're rolling around. He's trying to reach for his knife. One of the other guy's friends kicked the knife away, so nobody got to it. But it still laid a seed in my mind. So when I ended up teaching, I ended up using that as a drill.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that happens a lot with Kajukenbo guys. Like, a lot of Kajukenbo guys get into Kajukenbo because they're trying to find a style of martial art that is going to end, because they're in the street. And I know it gets criticized a lot. I heard a lot of people say this whole idea of being on the street sounds so fake. But the reason I got into Kajukenbo was the same reason. I was surrounded by gang violence. My neighborhood had drive-by shootings weekly drive-by shootings. And I went to school, junior high. I started going to public school. My parents were scared to put me in public school because they knew how dangerous it was. I was in home studies most of my life. They put me in public school in our neighborhood when I was in junior high. And every day I saw people getting jumped with chains and knives and clubs. So the whole idea for me of the streets is a very real thing. It's not like something I'm just saying to try to be a troll or to criticize when I see a technique. And I actually don't troll online. I don't say anything. But I do see people from both ends. Like, people who get criticized are like, well, I do MMA and I only apply my stuff for sport fighting, so I get upset when people talk about that would not work on the streets because I'm not thinking about that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I also see the criticism from someone who actually did have to use their martial art in the streets. In your case, you were a bouncer. I did bouncing, and I also had to deal with people trying to jump me when I was young. So, when I saw Kajukenbo, I was like, okay, this is something I can use on the street. They're doing 2-on-1s, 3-on-1s. I've seen these situations. I know what needs to be done, and they're actually practicing it. So that it seemed like the most practical approach. It's the reason I said this is, when I finally found Kajukenbo, like, this is what I've been looking for this whole time. And I did a lot of dojo hopping in between places like Taekwondo, and I even went to the jiu-jitsu place and passed up jiu-jitsu because that was the first thing I thought of when I love jiu-jitsu now. I'm actually working my way up the formal system and doing jiu-jitsu for a long time. But when I first saw jiu-jitsu before Kajukenbo, the first thing that came to my mind was like, well, I can't wrestle 3 guys at once. And that's what I'm seeing every day. It's not like like concocted. I know statistically speaking, you most likely will not end up in a street fight. If you live in a nice neighborhood or if you live in a good area, you most likely won't end up in a street fight unless you go to a dangerous area. But I lived in that dangerous area, and that's what brought me there.
I totally get that. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you breaking that down. Before I kind of finish things up, I always ask this question. What's your suggestion for someone who wants to start studying martial arts and doesn't know where to start? What's your suggestion for the average person who wants to pick up a martial art? But they have so many options now, right? You got Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, you got MMA, you got a lot of these Muay Thai and kickboxing and sport cardio. what's your advice as a martial arts instructor? What's your advice for these people?
Don't delay and just go do it. You got to find what works for you, what fits your body type. So you may dojo jump a little bit, but if you find the right place with the right instructor, you can get everything that you want all at once. Do due diligence, research, check all the reviews, make sure the reviews are good. And it's not about a style. It really isn't. It's about the instructor. You have to find the right instructor that has the right mindset and is teaching for the right reasons. Any style can be a good style for you, or for the most part, some people are better at kicking, some people are better at punching, some people are better at rolling around. So find what you think is your strength, research and see what style would fit you most. And of course, I'm always going to say, find a Kajukenbo school, because that's probably going to be your best bet and will give you what you want. It'll give you the skills, it'll give you the mindset, and it'll bring you into a family. And I say that all the time. Kajukenbo isn't a style, it's a mindset.
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. Well, you heard it here first, folks. Or I've had a few people on mention similar stuff, but you heard it here from Ron, straight from Ron here first. Well, I don't know what other podcasts you've been on, so I might be lying there, but you heard it here at least. Well, Ron, I want to thank you again very much for being on the show. To my listeners, stay tuned for the wrap-up. Projects. Right now, I'm working on a new series called Gelo's Laugh Lounge, where I do some comic bits that I've been working on. As some of you may know, I live out in the middle of nowhere, so as much as I would like to do stand-up, I don't have an audience that I'd be able to do that with, because I live in Japan, and there's a rice field. I guess I could do stand-up in a rice field in English. No one would understand what I'm talking about. That's why I don't do it. I make these videos. I love making YouTube videos. It's fun. It's my hobby. I hope you enjoy it too. If you do, just hit subscribe on this channel and you'll have access to not just the Social Gelo podcast, but you'll also have access to the Gelo's Laugh Lounge that I recently created, as well as my Kajukenbo series. If you're, for some reason, like me and you live in the middle of nowhere and you need something to kind of practice with, I actually share a lot of parts of my Kajukenbo program right here on my YouTube channel. You can watch it and learn some basic stuff like how to stretch properly and how to throw a punch and kick and line basics and stuff. Either way, I'll catch you all later. Thanks for tuning in and stay tuned till next time. Later.